Morning, everyone. This is the video for week 5. We're spending this week talking about Kohlberg's theory of moral development, and I want to make a couple of comments about Kohlberg, but then maybe a few more about the assignment and some of the things that are maybe important to think about in terms of critiquing either Perry or Kohlberg. So first and foremost, Kohlberg, like Perry, builds on the work of Piaget in looking at ethical and moral development. And so in that way, it's really, really similar to what Perry talked about. Instead of four positions that we looked at with Perry, Kohlberg is going to talk about 3 stages in there, and he organizes them in pre-conventional, conventional, and then post-conventional levels of moral reasoning. So just a couple of things to think about in terms of as you read this and as you apply to the film. First and foremost, it may feel like, okay, this is the second week in a row that we have a similar assignment. We're reading a theory and applying it to a film, and that's true. I think the films that we're watching give us the opportunity to maybe think about these theories in maybe a different way and provide a level of critique or a way of looking at them that's a little bit different. So when you think about the 2 movies we've been watching, one is Dead Poet Society, which was the assignment last week, and this week is A Few Good Men. It may seem that they're really, really different, but when you think about it, the settings are really very similar. Dead Poet Society takes place in the 1950s in a prep academy in New England for boys. And obviously the way the story went was it's a pretty structured environment where the headmaster is in charge of almost everything and in some ways is a godlike figure there. In A Few Good Men, it is set in the early 1990s in the Marine Corps and the Judge Advocate General, the JAG Corps. And again, because it's set in a highly authoritarian culture with, okay, ultimately who is responsible? Is it the Marine Corps? Is it the US government? Is it the JAG Corps? But again, very, very structured. Now, it's interesting to think about that because when we take Kohlberg's theory this week or Perry's theory last week, the environments that we're applying them to in these settings don't really sometimes, I think, mirror real life. Because there's some things that maybe are missing from the way, the context of those movies. The first is that just the overall context of these 2 movies is a little bit different than ordinary life. When you think about a boarding academy or think about being a Marine in Cuba, as it's depicted in A Few Good Men, you are pretty much told this is what your world looks like, this is what you do, this is when you do it, and this is how you do it, and the conversation around why really doesn't take place. But outside of those contexts, outside of maybe the military or a prep academy, life is full of questions about why. Why do we think the way we do? Why do people act the way they do? How do people come to the decisions that they do? There's just an opportunity for more freedom and questioning outside of the environment of these 2 films. And so that's something to think about when you think about these 2 assignments, especially Kohlberg this week. The second thing is, just in terms of context, maybe an extension of that, is relationships. Relationships in real life are, they're multi-layered, they're complex, and now you can make the argument in the movies that we've watched they are too. But ultimately, the idea of the kinds of relationships you have and the number of relationships you have and where authority comes makes a huge difference. So if you're like me and you're 53 years old, an authority structure, I don't necessarily look at my father as an authority structure. I don't necessarily look at my employer as an authority figure. Now, not saying they don't have any authority over me, but I don't view them as the ultimate authority. And so when you look at these 2 films, that relationship is there. There's a sense of ultimate authority. It's the headmaster, it's the commander, whoever it might be. So it might be a little easier to apply Kohlberg to A Few Good Men because there's a sense of ultimate authority in a relationship that is basically created upon that. And that doesn't necessarily take place in the real world. So it's a little bit more complex to say, okay, how does a person make a moral or ethical judgment in an environment where ultimate authority doesn't look the same way as it does in these films? And then lastly, I would just say related to authority is just the idea of status and long-term impact of authority. Again, when you watch A Few Good Men, you see that ultimately there is an outside body that says this is what you did and this is what the consequences are, and it's pretty clear, and it impacts their ability to stay in the Marine Corps. Authority in our lives maybe looks a little bit different, especially as we get older. Sometimes, I'm not saying they didn't bear the consequences for their decisions, but sometimes those consequences aren't necessarily as immediate as they might be in a highly structured environment like the military or a prep school. So just some things to think about as you look at these, as you look at this film, as you read Kohlberg's theory, as you think about pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional thinking in these characters, just kind of a reminder of sort of the context and relationship and scope of authority and the impact that plays. So any questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out. You can email me. I'd be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.